The Galactic Games were more than just a competition. They were the crucible in which the galaxy's future leaders were forged. The Grand Stadium, located on the artificial moon of Veneris, gleamed like a beacon in the cosmos, drawing cadets from across the galaxy. Thousands of spectators filled the stands, their species a kaleidoscope of color, size, and power. Hovering screens projected the opening ceremony as cadets filed in, each more impressive than the last. But amidst this sea of champions stood one human, Ethan Riker. His dark brown hair, slightly messy from the flight, and his solid average build made him look like any other cadet from Earth. Only one thing stood out: his eyes, sharp and full of determination. The moment Riker's name was announced, the crowd chuckled. A human. In the Galactic Games, he could hear them whisper. The other cadets, already eyeing their potential competition, dismissed him as a non-threat, hardly more than a curiosity. "Great, another experiment," muttered Zorak, the towering Drixer warrior who was rumored to be genetically engineered with an enhanced sense of smell. His gaze locked onto Riker, a sneer on his lips. Let's see how long he lasts before he breaks under pressure. Riker, however, felt no fear. Not now. Not ever. He had spent years training for this moment, against all odds. From the moment the Human Federation had signed him up, against their own doubts and fears, he had been preparing. Riker wasn't just here to win. He was here to make a statement. His first test arrived the very next day, the Survival Challenge. The arena where they would compete was a dangerous, simulated environment on the planet Volthrax, known for its deadly predators, unstable terrain, and hazardous atmosphere. It was designed to push cadets to their limits. Each competitor was dropped into the wilderness with nothing but a set of survival tools, forced to survive for 72 hours. The challenge was meant to whittle down the weak. Riker, with his lack of advanced technology and enhancements, knew it would be a test like no other. As the countdown began, cadets suited up in their combat gear, each preparing in their own way. Some meditated, some ran simulations, others, like Zorak, flexed their enhanced muscles, already confident of their superiority. Riker checked his gear one final time, his hand steady. The moment the countdown hit 0, the air around him shimmered, and he was dropped into the wilderness with a violent lurch. The ground beneath him was rocky, covered in thorny plants that hissed as they recoiled. Riker barely had time to steady himself before the first creature, a massive lizard-like beast with glowing red eyes, emerged from the foliage. Its teeth were as long as his arm, and it hissed as it lunged. His heart raced, but Riker didn't freeze. He dodged, his military training kicking in. He used a nearby rock to force the beast into a trap, taking it down with quick precision. This wasn't the first time he had fought for survival. Despite his success, Riker knew he was far from safe. The challenge had only just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. As he moved deeper into the alien landscape, he could feel the eyes of the galaxy on him, judging, waiting for him to fail. But Riker's resolve hardened. He wasn't just here to survive. He was here to show them that humanity had the will to succeed, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Riker's boots crunched against the dry, jagged ground of Volthrax as he moved cautiously through the alien landscape. The air was thin, dry, and tinged with a metallic scent that made his throat ache. Strange birds, with translucent wings and sharp beaks, squawked overhead. He didn't flinch. He knew that the environment was designed to kill, but he was here to survive. The first few hours were rough. Riker's survival skills, honed on Earth's harshest terrains, allowed him to adapt quickly to the unfamiliar planet. He fashioned a makeshift shelter from large leaves, protected himself with primitive weapons crafted from fallen rocks and branches, and avoided dangerous creatures lurking in the dense underbrush. But it wasn't enough to simply survive. This was the Galactic Games, and Riker's every move was being watched by a galaxy full of skeptical eyes. The first challenge was simple enough: stay alive. But staying alive while the rest of the galaxy's best cadets hunted. trapped, and stalked him was something else entirely. He had to outthink them, outlast them, and outfight them, all without the fancy gadgets and bioenhancements the others had. Zarak, of course, was already proving to be a formidable opponent. The Drixar warrior had turned the challenge into a brutal demonstration of strength, tearing through the wilderness like a storm. His massive frame effortlessly overcame every obstacle, his enhanced reflexes and instincts making him a living weapon. Riker could hear his boisterous roar echoing in the distance, a constant reminder of the strength he would need to outwit. Then there were the others, the elite cadets from the more ancient and powerful species. They too had their advantages: speed, advanced tracking technology, and incredible endurance. The Eltneri, a race of energy beings who could phase through solid matter, were already passing through the terrain with ease. The Arcturians, with their sharp claws and enhanced agility, moved like shadows, silent and predatory. But Riker, he was human, a species that had yet to prove it belonged in the same league. As the hours wore on, Riker's chances seemed slimmer. He stumbled upon a river, but as he crouched to drink, a massive creature emerged from the water. Its body like a giant, writhing snake, its mouth lined with serrated teeth. Instinctively, Riker dove aside just as it lunged. The creature's jaws snapped shut inches from his leg. He rolled to his feet, heart pounding, and grabbed a nearby boulder. With a roar, Riker hurled it toward the beast's face, striking it with a force that temporarily stunned it. It was enough for him to flee. Riker ran, pushing his body beyond its limits, his breath ragged as he scaled a rock cliff for higher ground. From the peak, he could see the other cadets, already making alliances, setting traps, and focusing on their own goals. But Riker didn't have time to focus on them. The real challenge was survival, and every moment counted. That night, exhausted but determined, Riker found a place to rest. He closed his eyes for a moment, but sleep wouldn't come. The games were far from over. And no matter how difficult it seemed, Riker would prove them all wrong. He would show the galaxy that a human could survive, could outwit, and most importantly, could win. The challenge was only beginning. The first night on Valthrax was a brutal test of endurance. Riker's makeshift shelter was little more than a pile of leaves and branches, offering scant protection against the planet's unforgiving elements. His body ached from the constant movement, and his stomach growled in protest as he ate the last of his meager rations. Sleep was a distant luxury. Instead, Riker lay awake, his eyes scanning the shadowy edges of his camp, waiting for the next challenge to present itself. The next morning came too soon. Riker rose with the dawn, his muscles stiff from the cold, but there was no time to waste. He needed food and water, and more importantly, he needed to keep moving. The hunt for the other cadets had begun in earnest. As he ventured deeper into the planet's treacherous terrain, he could feel the competition closing in. No longer just the alien creatures, but the cadets themselves, and Zarak was at the front of the pack. Zarak, the Drixar warrior, had made his intentions clear from the start. The massive alien had stalked Riker since the first challenge, watching him from afar, savoring the idea of hunting down the lone human. His species was known for their strength and ruthlessness, and Zarak had only one goal: to prove that humans were too weak, too insignificant to be in the Galactic Games. Riker's stomach twisted as he heard the heavy thud of footsteps behind him, a rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. He turned sharply to see Zarak charging toward him, his eyes blazing with contempt. There was no time to think, only to react. Riker's hand shot out, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground. He swung it at Zarak, aiming for the Drixar's head. But Zarak was too fast, dodging with unnatural agility, his muscles rippling as he countered with a swift blow that sent Riker sprawling. Riker gritted his teeth, barely avoiding a crushing strike from Zarak's fist. He rolled to the side, scrambling to his feet. He was no match for the Drixar in terms of raw power. Riker knew that. But he had something Zarak didn't: the ability to think on his feet, to outsmart his enemies. Riker darted into a cluster of thorny bushes, hoping to lose Zarak in the dense underbrush. As Zarak followed, Riker heard a voice, a soft, melodic voice, cut through the air. "Stop!" From the shadows emerged Cora, an Elknary cadet, her energy-based form shimmering with an ethereal glow. She wasn't fully corporeal, her figure flickering between solid and translucent, as if she were barely tethered to the physical world. Cora had been one of the cadets who had initially dismissed Riker as nothing more than an experiment. But her words now were different, calm, and calculated. "Let him go," Cora said, her voice firm yet soothing. Her energy pulse flared, lighting up the area around them. Zarek's brow furrowed, but he hesitated. He might have been a warrior, but Cora's power was not to be underestimated. She could manipulate energy fields, phase through solid matter, and disrupt an opponent's mental focus. In a battle of raw strength, Riker would have been dead in seconds. But Cora wasn't interested in fighting him. At least, not yet. "This human has potential," Cora said, turning her glowing gaze toward Riker, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "He can be useful, but we'll have to work together if we're to survive this challenge." Zarak growled, frustrated, but backed off. He knew better than to challenge an Elknary cadet, especially one who wielded energy with such mastery. With a last glare at Riker, he turned and disappeared into the jungle. Riker, still breathless and on edge, exchanged a wary look with Cora. She wasn't his ally, not yet, but the fact that she had intervened said something important. She wasn't like the others. "I'm not here to make friends," Riker said cautiously, wiping the sweat from his brow. "But thanks for the help." Cora's flickering form pulsed with an amused light. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for me." Riker raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you want?" Cora's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she spoke, her voice lower, almost thoughtful. "The games are more than just a test of strength. They're about strategy. And right now, you're one of the few who hasn't been caught up in the game of egos. We could work together. Survive together." Riker didn't trust her fully, but she was right about one thing. Survival was all that mattered now. He nodded, his expression steely. "We'll see." And just like that, an uneasy alliance was born. The days on Valthrax blurred together as the competition grew more intense. Riker's uneasy alliance with Cora had evolved into something of a partnership. She offered him valuable insight into the tactics of other cadets, and in return, Riker's resourcefulness proved indispensable. While Cora's energy manipulation made her a formidable fighter, Riker's creativity kept them one step ahead of their enemies. Together, they navigated the deadly terrain, setting traps, scavenging for supplies, and avoiding the predatory creatures that seemed to stalk their every move. But the clock was ticking. The first phase of the games was nearly over, and the cadets who survived would move on to the next round. Riker's heart pounded as he realized that the stakes were rising. His every move, his every decision, was being scrutinized. If he failed now, all would be lost. But more than that, he felt the pressure to prove to the galaxy that humans weren't weak, that they could stand tall among the galaxy's most powerful species. The next event was the zero-gravity arena, an environment designed to test the cadets' combat prowess in extreme conditions. Riker had seen the simulations, and they were brutal. A series of floating platforms suspended in an artificial gravity field, constantly shifting and rotating, were the battlefield. In the center of the arena, a towering structure housed the competition's coveted prize, an ancient artifact, said to be worth a fortune, symbolizing the victor's glory. The cadets had to fight their way to the artifact, eliminating one another in the process. Riker's heart raced as he and Cora suited up, the pressure mounting. They'd been preparing for this challenge since the beginning, but the others were far better equipped. The cadets from the most powerful species, like Zarak, were genetically enhanced for combat, their reflexes honed to perfection. Riker and Cora, on the other hand, had to rely on strategy and timing. No one expected them to survive. As they entered the arena, the air around them shimmered, and the ground below disappeared, replaced by floating platforms that drifted in every direction. A bell rang, and chaos erupted. Zarek charged immediately, his massive frame thundering across the nearest platform. But Riker was already in motion. With a quick glance at Cora, they split up. Cora phased through a platform to gain the high ground, her form flickering like a ghost. Riker, his pulse pounding, darted behind a nearby column of shifting energy, using its cover to his advantage. The battle that ensued was a blur of movement and violent collisions. Zarek was a powerhouse, tearing through cadets with brutal efficiency, while Riker moved like a shadow, striking when least expected, using the arena's constantly shifting platforms to confuse and disorient his opponents. He knew that fighting strength with strength would be a losing battle. Instead, he used his agility and instincts, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But then, a twist. One of the cadets, an Arcturian with sharp claws and incredible agility, made a critical mistake. He lunged at Riker, but the human cadet was already one step ahead. In a move that could only be described as reckless brilliance, Riker ducked, letting the Arcturian's claws scrape harmlessly across his side, and then delivered a powerful elbow strike that sent the cadet flying off the edge of the platform. It was a gamble, and it paid off. The Arcturian plummeted into the abyss below, eliminated from the round. Riker barely had time to catch his breath before he spotted Zarek charging toward him, his eyes burning with fury. This wasn't going to be easy. Zarek was bigger, faster, and stronger. Riker's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, he crouched low, preparing for the fight of his life. Before Zarek could make his move, however, a strange energy pulse shot through the arena. A loud crackling noise filled the air, and everything froze. The shifting platforms came to a sudden stop, and the cadets, disoriented, looked around in confusion. A voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "This is not a drill. There has been an adjustment in the rules of the games. We will now proceed to a new phase, elimination." Riker's eyes narrowed. He had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it was, he wasn't going to let it stop him. The announcement echoed through the arena like a thunderclap, reverberating in Riker's chest. Elimination phase. The words had a weight to them, a finality that made every cadet's pulse race. The zero-gravity arena, which had been a chaotic battleground, now felt even more oppressive. Riker's heart pounded in his ears as he exchanged a quick glance with Cora, who had phased back onto the platform, her glowing form flickering with unease. "What's coming?" Riker asked, his voice low, barely audible over the distant hum of the arena systems. Cora's flickering light dimmed, her energy signature pulsing with tension. "I don't know," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge of uncertainty. "But whatever it is, it's not going to be easy." Riker had no illusions about what elimination meant. The games had been brutal, and now they were entering a new stage where survival wasn't just about outlasting the elements or outsmarting the competition. It was about fighting to the bitter end. With every cadet out for blood, he had to be more vigilant than ever. Suddenly, the arena's artificial sun flared, casting long shadows over the shifting platforms. An unfamiliar noise rang out, sharp and mechanical. Then the ground trembled beneath Riker's feet. The lights dimmed, and the platforms began to shift again. But this time, they weren't just moving. The entire arena was reconfiguring. "What's happening?" Riker muttered, his hand instinctively reaching for a nearby piece of debris to use as a weapon. Then, without warning, the arena's edge split open, revealing a vast, hollow chamber beneath the platforms. From within, a mechanical roar erupted, followed by a massive figure rising from the depths of the arena. The cadets recoiled in shock. A towering, armored monstrosity, its body lined with glowing energy conduits, emerged, an automated combat droid built to test cadets' skills under the most extreme conditions. Its design was monstrous, with multiple weapon systems, a massive energy shield, and claws capable of slicing through metal like butter. The droid's optics glowed a cold blue, scanning the arena for targets. It didn't care about alliances. It didn't care about anything but destruction. And it was coming for them. Zarak, who had been stalking Riker's every move, immediately surged forward, roaring in anger. "This thing doesn't scare me," he bellowed, charging toward the droid with reckless abandon. His fists swung, aiming for the machine's head. But as Zarak's blows landed, the droid's shield absorbed the impact without a scratch. With a swift motion, the droid retaliated, slamming Zarak back with a crushing blow that sent him crashing into a platform. He didn't move after that. "We need to work together," Cora said sharply, her voice suddenly urgent. She had phased back behind Riker, her form flickering with intensity. "If we don't, none of us will survive this." Riker nodded, his mind racing. The droid was relentless, its sensors locked onto every movement. It had no mercy, no hesitation. He could already see other cadets trying to dodge its attacks or fire weapons at its armored body, but it was futile. Riker knew that if they didn't outsmart it, they wouldn't make it past this phase. Cora was already at work. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a burst of energy that momentarily stunned the droid's targeting system. It faltered for a split second, its optics flickering as it recalibrated. Riker seized the opportunity, darting behind the nearest platform to find a weak spot. His eyes locked onto the exposed energy core at the droid's back, its one vulnerability. But getting to it meant getting past the droid's claws and devastating energy blasts. "You ready?" Riker asked, turning to Cora. "Always," she replied with a flicker of confidence. Riker's pulse quickened as the plan came together. Cora would use her energy manipulation to keep the droid's attention, creating openings for Riker to strike. The timing had to be perfect. One wrong move, and the droid's unrelenting force would tear them apart. The droid turned, its weapon systems locking onto Cora's glowing form. Riker didn't wait. He sprinted, moving with a burst of speed, ducking behind floating platforms, and leaping across the shifting terrain. As Cora distracted the machine with a series of energy blasts, Riker closed in on the droid's back, his heart thundering in his chest. The moment arrived. Riker launched himself at the droid's exposed energy core, his body colliding with it at full force. With a grunt of exertion, he jammed his makeshift weapon into the core, piercing the metal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the droid's systems began to glitch, its energy shield flickering. It let out a mechanical screech, a final, desperate thrash as sparks erupted from its damaged systems. With one last convulsion, the droid collapsed, its massive body crumpling to the floor, lifeless. Riker stumbled back, breathless, as the arena fell silent. The cadets were still recovering from the chaos of the battle, but Riker knew something had changed. He had done the impossible. The droid had fallen, but the games were far from over. The droid's collapse echoed across the arena, its once menacing form now a twisted heap of sparking metal and broken systems. Riker stood panting, his chest heaving with exertion, as the last of the sparks fizzled out from the wreckage. Around him, the remaining cadets, their eyes wide with disbelief, slowly began to stir. Many had stayed back, watching the carnage unfold from the safety of distant platforms. Others, realizing the droid had been neutralized, hesitated before moving forward. For a brief moment, there was only silence. A heavy, tense silence where every cadet seemed to hold their breath. The games had just taken a turn, and Riker had made an indelible mark. Cora, her form flickering in the fading light, was the first to move. She floated effortlessly to Riker's side, her glowing presence like a ghost in the dimming arena. "Well done," she said, a note of grudging respect in her voice. "I didn't expect you to take it down so quickly." Riker wiped the sweat from his brow, his body aching from the exertion. "I didn't have much of a choice," he said, trying to catch his breath. The thing was practically indestructible. Cora nodded. True, but now we're not out of the woods yet. The real test is coming. Just as she spoke, the arena's lights shifted, bathing the arena in an eerie red hue. A sudden voice crackled over the loudspeakers, echoing through the hollow expanse of the arena. Attention, cadets. Congratulations on surviving the elimination phase. However, only one will be crowned victor. The final test begins now. You must reach the artifact. Riker's heart skipped a beat. The artifact, the prize of the games, the one thing that every cadet had fought for. It was located at the highest point of the arena, atop a massive spire that jutted into the artificial sky. The path to the artifact was treacherous, filled with traps, obstacles, and cadets willing to do anything to win. There would be no more alliances now. It was every cadet for themselves. The final test wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about proving who was the best. Riker's gaze locked onto the spire. He knew that getting to it wouldn't be easy. There were only a few remaining cadets, and they were already positioning themselves in anticipation of the final dash. Zarak, despite his earlier defeat, was still a formidable presence, his pride and rage making him all the more dangerous. And there were others, Cora included, who had their own reasons for wanting to win. Riker turned to her. "What's the plan?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. Cora's glowing form flickered thoughtfully for a moment. "You've proven you can think on your feet," she said, her eyes glinting. "But this is no longer about tricks or traps. It's about reaching the artifact before anyone else does." Riker nodded. There was no time for hesitation. The other cadets were already moving, and the spire was towering above them like a looming shadow. Cora vanished, phasing through the air, leaving a faint trail of energy in her wake. Riker turned and sprinted toward the base of the spire, the sounds of the other cadets closing in behind him. His legs burned, his mind sharp, calculating the best path forward as he navigated through the shifting platforms and hazardous terrain. The higher he climbed, the more obstacles appeared. Floating rocks, razor-sharp barriers, and sudden bursts of energy from the arena's systems designed to slow him down. The path wasn't straightforward, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. As Riker neared the top, he could hear Zarak's booming voice echoing behind him, cursing and pushing forward with all his might. The Drixer wasn't far behind, and Riker could feel the weight of the warrior's relentless pursuit. This was it, the final sprint to the artifact. Reaching the summit, Riker's eyes locked onto the artifact, glowing with ancient power. But before he could make his move, something shifted beneath his feet. A platform gave way, and he barely caught himself, swinging to the side as the ground crumbled away. A cold laugh rang out from above. Zarak had caught up. "You think you're fast enough, human?" Zarak bellowed, his voice a thunderous roar. Riker's pulse quickened. This was no longer a test of survival. It was a battle of wills, and only one of them would claim the artifact. The artifact loomed before Riker, glowing with an otherworldly light at the pinnacle of the spire. Its energy thrummed through the air, beckoning, promising power and glory to whoever could claim it. But as his fingers neared the base of the pedestal, the ground beneath him trembled once more. A deep, rumbling roar echoed through the arena as Zarak's towering form emerged from the shadows, his footsteps shaking the very foundation of the spire. "You're not fast enough, human," Zarak growled, his voice thick with malice. He stood at the edge of the platform, his massive body casting a shadow over Riker. "You're too weak. You'll never win this." Riker's heart pounded in his chest, the blood rushing in his ears. His body ached from the brutal challenges of the games, but there was no turning back now. The artifact was within his grasp, but Zarak, towering, unstoppable, stood between him and victory. Every instinct in Riker's body screamed at him to back down, to concede, to find another way. But something in his chest burned brighter than fear. He couldn't let go of this chance. Not now. "You want this," Riker said, his voice low but steady, even as his muscles screamed for rest. "Come take it." With that, Zarak lunged forward, his fists aimed at Riker's chest. The Drixar warrior moved with terrifying speed, his claws slashing through the air. Riker barely dodged, rolling to the side just in time to avoid a crushing blow. His heart raced, and his mind whirled, calculating his next move as Zarak advanced with relentless aggression. Riker wasn't stronger than Zarak. That much was clear. The Drixar's sheer size and power were overwhelming. But Riker had something Zarak didn't: his quick thinking and his drive. He wasn't here just to survive anymore. He was here to prove that humans could hold their own in the galaxy's toughest challenges. Zarak swung again, and Riker ducked, his movements sharp and precise. He used the momentum of the Drixar's swing against him, pushing off the platform with his feet and using the height to his advantage. Zarak staggered forward, off balance for a moment, and Riker seized the opportunity. In a desperate move, he hurled himself at the Drixar's side, aiming for the weak point where the armor met flesh. His elbow connected with a satisfying crunch, but Zarak quickly recovered, spinning to face him with eyes full of fury. "You think you can defeat me, human?" Zarak snarled. "I've killed for sport. I've torn apart entire fleets. You're nothing." Riker wiped the blood from his lip, his breathing ragged. "Maybe," he said, his voice unwavering, "but you're not the first to underestimate me." Zarak roared and lunged again, but this time Riker was ready. As the Drixar barreled toward him, Riker darted forward with everything he had, launching himself toward the pedestal where the artifact rested. With a swift motion, he reached out and grabbed hold of the base of the glowing relic. The moment his hand touched it, the arena seemed to hum with energy, the light of the artifact flaring brightly. The air crackled with power as the ground shook beneath them. Zarak came to a screeching halt, his massive form only inches from Riker. For a split second, everything froze. Time, the world, the galaxy itself. Then, the floor beneath Zarak gave way. The Drixar let out a roar of surprise as he fell through a crack in the spire, his enormous form disappearing into the chasm below. Riker stood there, his hand still gripping the artifact, the weight of victory slowly sinking in. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The remaining cadets, the ones who had been lurking in the shadows or cautiously circling the spire, now surged forward. The final phase was far from finished. They were all here for one reason: the artifact. And no one was going to let Riker take it without a fight. Riker's heart raced as he turned to face the incoming challengers. Cora, who had been observing from a distance, phased into view. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the other cadets. "It's not just about reaching the artifact," she said softly, her energy form flickering with intent. "It's about who's willing to hold on to it." Riker tightened his grip around the artifact, his fingers pressing into its surface. There was no turning back now. The games were far from over. And now, it was a battle to the death for the ultimate prize. Riker would need to summon every ounce of courage and cunning to hold on to the victory that had, for so long, seemed out of reach. The arena was a battlefield, and Riker was at the center of it. The artifact, now firmly in his grasp, glowed with an almost hypnotic brilliance, pulsing with energy as if it were alive. The weight of it felt heavier than ever in his hands, not just from its power, but from the realization that his fight had only just begun. His body ached, his breath ragged from the struggles that had led him to this moment, but there was no time for rest. The remaining cadets were already moving in, their eyes locked on the prize. Cora appeared at his side, her form flickering with determination, her energy crackling as she sized up the new threat. "They're not going to stop," she warned, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable edge. "This is the final test, Riker. They'll do anything to take that from you." Riker nodded, his eyes scanning the arena as the other cadets closed in from all sides. Zarak was gone, but that didn't mean the danger had passed. The other competitors were just as deadly, and now that they knew Riker had the artifact, they wouldn't hesitate to fight for it. A sleek, insectoid synthar cadet, one of the last to remain, skittered toward him, its multiple limbs moving with unnatural speed. It hissed, raising a jagged blade, and charged with terrifying precision. Riker reacted instantly, pivoting on his heel and ducking beneath the strike, using the momentum of the attack to push the synthar back with a well-timed kick. The creature stumbled but recovered quickly, its eyes narrowing as it prepared for another assault. Riker's mind raced. He couldn't fight them all off, not without help. Cora had already phased out of sight, but he could feel her energy signature somewhere nearby, ready to strike when the moment came. The synthar lunged again, its serrated blade slashing through the air. But this time, Riker was ready. He sidestepped the attack, grabbing the creature's arm and using its own momentum to throw it off balance. With a quick twist, he disarmed it, sending the blade flying into the air. As the creature staggered back, Riker pressed forward, delivering a sharp kick to its chest that sent the synthar careening off the edge of the platform, disappearing into the abyss below. The crowd, unseen but omnipresent, erupted into applause. But Riker didn't have time to revel in the victory. The other cadets were closing in. There was no room for error. He had to move, and fast. Cora reappeared at his side, her form shimmering in and out of existence. "One last push," she said, her eyes glowing with intensity. "We make a run for it. Now." Riker didn't hesitate. With a burst of energy, they both sprinted toward the final stretch of the spire, the artifact still clutched tightly in Riker's hands. The remaining cadets were desperate now, pushing forward with everything they had, knowing that only one would walk away with the victory. A Draxian, a hulking beast of a cadet, swung a massive energy weapon toward Riker, but Cora intercepted the blow, her energy shield flaring as she absorbed the impact. She flung the Draxian aside with a blast of force, clearing the path. With Cora's help, Riker reached the top of the spire in a final sprint, his legs burning, his heart pounding. He could see the finish line, just a few more steps. The final platform where the artifact would be declared his. But then, a voice thundered over the arena speakers, cold and commanding. "This is the final stage, cadets. The artifact now belongs to the one who can claim it from the arena. Do not let it go. Do not let him go." Riker's heart skipped a beat. The games were far from over. The last cadet remaining was locked in a desperate fight, not for survival, but for dominance. Without warning, the final floor beneath them began to collapse, forcing Riker and Cora to scramble for solid ground. The lights flickered, the ground cracked, and everything seemed to cave in at once. The final battle had begun. With everything around him falling apart, Riker's determination solidified. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting to prove that humans could stand toe-to-toe with the galaxy's most powerful beings. He wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. Cora phased in front of him, standing between Riker and the rest of the cadets. Her energy formed a shining barrier of light. "This is it," she said, her voice clear and resolute. "We win together." In that moment, Riker knew she was right. This wasn't just about him. It was about all of humanity. And with a final surge of will, he clutched the artifact tighter than ever, ready for whatever came next. The arena fell silent, the final challenge about to unfold. Riker's journey was far from over. But one thing was certain. Humanity had proven its worth in the Galactic Games, and now the universe would have to reckon with that.